Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Thomas Sievert. I'm here to present my paper on the urgent need for a national climate science education initiative for Aotearoa, New Zealand. And because I'm presenting here in the post-normal science education conference, my first question is, what is and when was normal anyway? So in order to talk about that, I have met this family here on the way to the conference, and I called out to them and said, "Well, are you having a good day?" And the mother called back and said, "No, we're just having another normal day." And I proceeded telling her, "No, no, you don't. You are not having a normal day at all. You're actually embedded in a shockwave of a exponential explosion of human activity that has been going on for a very short while, and you're going to be propelled forward by this shockwave further. Your day is not normal at all." Of course, she looked back to me and glanced back at me and couldn't quite believe what I was saying. But if you take a wide view, as I have done here, and I'm a physicist, I need a frame of reference for things that I look at. So I took a frame of reference that takes a wide view from like 10,000 years back in time to our current time, and our current time has also been called the Anthropocene, and it becomes obvious that the Anthropocene is some cataclysmic event that when you think forward in time how this movie would look like into the future, it's probably going to be just some catastrophic sort of blip. And shockwaves are very violent events. They come past fast, and when they hit you, pressure builds up quickly and it gets very, very hot. So this to me looks like some sort of a shockwave. And you could take this curve to be, well, this one here is namely the population curve of humans on Earth, but you can draw just about any curve of human activity, and it'll look like that if you draw it up over the time scale that I've done here. Now, in the bottom corner here, there is an apple core, and I guess I need to explain what that apple core is all about. Well, here we come to the apple core. So I am not religious at all, but this picture from the Christian mythology has always been with me for a long time, and here finally I can use it for making a point. Here are our first two scientists, and mind you, also science educators, Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve are gorging themselves here on the apples from the tree of knowledge. They're egged on by the little snake here, telling them that would be a good idea to do. And so when you do that, when you gorge yourselves on the apples of the tree of knowledge and develop a scientific understanding of the world around you, you become extremely powerful. And so humans have become extremely powerful. So we exponentially expanded all our activities all around the world. Our population expanded exponentially, and our impact on the world also expanded exponentially as well. And of course, back in the day here, there were consequences foretold that would happen if we would gorge ourselves on the apples from the tree of knowledge. And well, sadly, last year, a small little town in California on the Sierra Nevada, and that town was called Paradise, and that town sadly burned down in a pre-climate change-enabled forest fire, and I think about 50 people perished. It's very, very sad. So Paradise burned down. Now, over here, when I went to high school, in my last year of high school, I read the first version of a book called Limits to Growth by the Club of Rome. And this book seemed totally reasonable to me. It made complete sense to me. And back in the day, it spurred on my desire to study physics because I immediately realized by reading this book that we will need a few more planets. So I thought studying physics might provide a door out of all this problem that we're having there. But of course, if you do study physics, you very quickly realize that Star Trek will remain fantasy forever. It's just impossible to do. So yeah, there we are. We have expanded exponentially, and we're now approaching the limits to that growth. Here are some more curves of the topic of climate change, of course, that indicate the exponential times we're in. Here's carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, the temperature rearing up, sea levels rising suddenly, and the oxygen levels dropping slowly. And that beautiful set of graphs is available at climatelevels.org, which is a fantastic website. If you want to argue with somebody on Facebook whether or not global warming is real, I quite often just drop that pane here into the discussion, and then quite quickly people who argue that it's all natural and things aren't actually happening, they become quite quiet. So if you don't do anything about all this, if we leave the Earth to trundle along on its current path to global heating, then this will very likely occur. The author David Wells has written this book called The Uninhabitable Earth, and for anybody who wants to get an understanding of what it actually means if we allow the Earth to surpass 3 or 4 degree warming, which we may reach by the end of the century if we do nothing, if that occurs, then this scenario here is very, very likely to occur, at least uninhabitable for people like us. So we need to do something, and what we realize we need to do is we need to bring our carbon emissions, this is the carbon emissions graph here, we bring our carbon emissions graph back to a net zero emission scenario, and we need to do this very quickly if we want to limit global warming to what scientists believe to be the upper safe limit of doing so, and safe is in quotation marks here already, of 1.5 degrees. So we need to do this quickly and rapidly. And this is a massive, massive problem because everything you see around you and everything we humans have made for us, everything is predicated by, depends on our current level of fossil fuel use, because that is what's driving pretty much everything we do. All our human activities are powered to a large degree by fossil fuels at the moment. So that's a problem right there, but we have a problem that is much, much, much worse. And that problem is that our economic model in the world right now is not just predicated by or dependent on the current level of energy use from fossil fuels. No, it is actually predicated by the exponential further growth of our economy. All economists these days will tell you normally, or standard economists will tell you, that we need to keep growing by X% per year in order to have a healthy economic future. And that means we are not only predicated by the current level of emissions, but even by its continuous growth. And well, that's we need to end. So we have a massive, massive, massive change ahead of us that we need to somehow accomplish. And so I would agree with the Inter-Academy Partnership for Science that climate science education that we must do is an education problem of unprecedented magnitude. What we need to accomplish is we need to accomplish a change of our educational model. At the moment, we educate our kids to aspire to having big salaries so they can then earn the lifestyle that they're accustomed from their parents. That sort of self-reinforcing dream, that's what our educational model at the moment tries to achieve when we educate our kids at school. But we need to achieve an educational model that foremost wants to preserve the living planet so we can actually have a future, any future at all. And that is, I would say, like a meta-education problem. We need to change the educational paradigm from this educational paradigm to this educational paradigm. We need to change education itself. And we need to educate ourselves how to do that. So it's a meta-education problem of unprecedented magnitude. And unfortunately, this education we need to do against many enemies or hindrances, or as Clifford would say, dragons of inaction. These dragons of inaction that Clifford names is limited cognition. And unfortunately, we have a lot of this. If you look on Facebook and other places, there's limited cognition going on. We're up against ideologies that rat people into shoeboxes of thinking out of which they cannot escape easily. We're up against social norms. My neighbor is driving a big car. I need a big car. My neighbor has a big house. I need a big house. My neighbor has a holiday in Hawaii. I need to have a holiday overseas as well. We're up against the dragon of sunk costs. I have invested into this coal-fired power plant for Frontera, and bloody well, I will burn coals for the next 25 years because otherwise my sunk investment will be a lost investment. So people defend against change because all the investments they have made or currently placed that not allow this change to happen. Mistrust, of course, is another dragon of inaction that keeps us from doing things, because if we don't trust the science or don't trust the message that the science gives us, then how can we be convinced that it's necessary for us to make changes? Risk perception is another of those hindrances to change. We believe that our life at the moment is comfortable and nice, and any change to it might be very, very risky. and so we are risk averse. We don't want to have change because it may be risky to do so. And another very, very big and complicated one is tokenism. Many people want to avoid making real changes in their life because they point to the fact that they're already doing something. They're already recycling their plastic bottles. They're already having a compost heap in their garden. That's wonderful, but it is actually tokenism compared to the real change we need to do. And we encounter tokenism quite often on the internet when, say, children strike for climate at school, and we hear then stories being put out on the internet. Oh, these kids, they should go out and pick up rubbish. Well, picking up rubbish is important. It's an important thing we need to all do. But compared to what we really need to accomplish, picking up rubbish is tokenism that keeps us locked into the belief that we're doing enough, but we're not doing not nearly enough, really. We're also up against a fundamental change in the way we inform ourselves and we educate ourselves. In the past, when I grew up, the educational model was this. Scientists discovered great new theories and scientific discoveries of the world. These discoveries and their writings were peer-reviewed, out of which then came a peer-reviewed and well thought through paper, or book, and editors and the printing press process put another filter into place. You had to invest in making lots of books printed, and that let the whole message go again through the probably heads that knew very well what was going on. And so you ended up having a well-written book that was then disseminated to the masses. We all consumed this book. This is how education used to work. But of course, now all filters have disappeared. Any complete ignoramus who believe that climate change is a hoax can bleat out the message to the millions on the internet with a few key clicks on Twitter and Facebook. And this is a new pathway of information. And of course, we see it at school quite often that kids come to school, they believe that we teachers teaching the science that has been written down in books, that we don't really know what we're talking about because you can inform yourself about just about anything on the internet. And the filter is missing. So some educators now believe we need to educate our students and our adults also to have a personal filter that is strong enough to understand what is hoax and what is good science, what is good message to actually take in and possibly hand on and post on. Then, of course, we're up against wealthy bad actors, people who are deliberately trying to diffuse the message of climate change with a complete fraud. These people here, for example, are renowned for it. It's the Koch brothers from America, industrialists, heavily invested into the oil industry and fossil fuel industry in America. These guys have bankrolled half the Republican Party. These guys have bankrolled a lot of think tanks that put out mythology about climate change and disinformation about climate change, and they're bankrolling this with lots and lots and lots of money. And it becomes questionable whether or not our democracy can sustain itself in such an environment where so much deliberately created fraud is rained upon our minds through social media and also print media. This Koch brother here, he died recently, and story goes that the Republican senators that he owns, he inherited to his brother David over here. So maybe that story is true. Yeah, and all this disinformation has consequences. People disinformed elect populist autocrats to power. The money people behind it laugh all the way to the banks about all this, and we have people now running many countries in the world that are extraordinarily ignorant about the science that we need to actually unite behind, and that lead the world into an extraordinarily dangerous and selfish, destructive path. It is just horrendous. Now we have in our New Zealand here a government that has seen that we need to do something about climate change, and we need to bring New Zealand to net zero carbon by 2050. So our government is proposing the Zero Carbon Act for New Zealand, which is a sustainable policy. But the question is, will this policy be carried by our electorate? Because in our country, just like in all the other countries, we have people like this who are disinforming the people. And we have in our electorate lots of people who are not educated at all about what climate change is all about and what is at stake. And when you peruse the comment section under some of the excellent articles on climate change and stuff and other papers, you can read all these quotes everywhere. And it remains to me questionable whether or not our electorate is actually ready to receive and support the policy that our current government sees necessary to be done. So I believe we need to preload the release of these policies with a strong climate change education campaign. So I think we need a national climate change or climate science education initiative. That initiative, I believe, should be at arm's length from the government, but it should be funded by the government, I believe. It should be based in academia, so it's not a subject to political swings and election cycles. It should focus primarily, first of all, on adult climate science education, because our adult population at the moment is our current electorate that makes the choices at the ballot box. And we still have a large number of people in our adult electorate who are not well informed on climate change matters at all. We also must look at our school reform. We currently have an NCA reform in our NZQA system of achievement standards in our schools underway. That reform is about to conclude in 2024. That's a fairly long time frame. And we need to make sure that this reform realizes that at the moment, from the 1,088 active NZQA achievement standards in level 1, 2, and 3, none of them has a deliberate climate change focus, and many students go through high schools in New Zealand and learn pretty much nothing about climate change at all in their normal school life. I also believe that these wonderful places here, Auckland Museum or Te Papa and similar places, should not only be places where we can visit our wonderful past and look at dinosaurs and etc. These should be places where there is a whole department dedicated to our possible futures, where we can go in there and go with our school classes or by ourselves and interact with a rich display of the scenarios into the future that may or may not play themselves out depending on our choices today. It should be a place for seminars, for lectures, for town meetings, for people to interact with the near future. Near future, I mean within the next decades of the century, towards the end of our century. The near future that we now have all the means and possibly the political will to actually make dramatic changes to. So in order to make the right choices, we need to interact with how this would look like. And I believe these museums should be well advised to dedicate a significant area to their exhibition space to looking at the future and not just at the past. And I hope somebody is listening to that from who is the curators of these museums and realizes the imperative that they have to engage us with our future and not just with our past. Yeah, we scientists over the last couple of hundred years, with our scientific discoveries and success, we caused the exponential explosion of human capabilities. Here is a smoking apple that proves that it was us who caused that. And we now need to fix this. We scientists now need to embark on a significant education initiative to unite all the people behind the science and fix this problem or bust. And I'll leave you with this picture again of just another normal day. Here's a snake that got us into gorging the apples from the tree of knowledge. A bit self-surprised here at the outcome that was achieved. And you all have heard about the Lorax, of course, who just can't believe what's going on. And yeah, here you are. That's your family right now, believing that you had just another normal day. In fact, your entire life, anybody listens to this, your entire life has been lived in that section here. Your entire life has been lived inside a shockwave of some colossal explosion that, unless we do something about it, will definitely not end well at all, and it will not end well soon. Thank you for listening.